Study session, our first topic today at 4:30 p.m. is the Cleve Street redevelopment update. I don't have a name beside it, so I'm not sure. It must be the just back from the deep woods, Travis Mahalik.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to kick this one off and turn it over fairly quickly. Just to start, this study session topic has been in the works since around December in varying permutations. I think it started off as some general ideas. Trustee Brown had asked for a study session on what the redevelopment of Cleve Street would look like. It's sort of morphed over time. The town staff, as we have been working on the Bighorn parking structure, which is also on your agenda for tonight, has been approached by Whimsadoodle Incorporated, and we have a representative of Whimsadoodle here tonight, Walt Dietrich, who will introduce himself shortly, with an idea for a redevelopment on Cleve Street that would span the town's parcel on the Bighorn lot, the parcel at 157 Cleve Street, which is owned by the Housing Authority, and a parcel just to the west of 157 Cleve Street that is owned by Whimsadoodle. So I'm going to defer on the specifics of this project to Mr. Dietrich, but I did want to let you know what we're looking for this evening. Very early on in this conception, we've looked at, generally speaking, what the kind of the broad pros and cons are in terms of having a purpose-built structure over 3 parcels instead of a really narrowly focused parking structure on 1 parcel. Some of the cons being the time frame, the desire for new parking there quickly. Before we go much further down this line of discussion and conversation, we wanted to have a checkpoint with the board with this proposal in front of us to see if there's general interest in fleshing this out more. That would be town staff working closely with the Housing Authority and Whimsadoodle to put some meat on the bones of this proposed partnership idea. So that's what we're looking for tonight. Whether the town board wants staff to invest time in further exploring this concept and bringing something back to the board that has more detail behind it, or whether you would prefer to head down the path of focusing only on our lot and continuing forward with the Bighorn parking garage, which is that second item on your agenda. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Walt Dietrich with Whimsadoodle Incorporated.
Walt, will you press the button at the bottom of your mic to turn it on?
Yes.
Beautiful, thank you.
Is that better?
Yep,
Okay.
thanks.
Mr. Mayor, honorable trustees, administrators, thank you very much for allowing me some time to make this presentation. I am up, that's good. I'm just going to hit one button and make sure that I'm working correctly, and I am. I am Walt Dietrich. I'm very honored to be the president of Whimsadoodle Foundation, which is a not-for-profit operating foundation based in Estes Park. It was formed at the death by the estate of Barb Marshall. I know many of you know Barb Marshall. I had the honor of first meeting her when I was 12 years old. She was my wife's best friend forever. They were birthday twins, and I think we introduced Barb to Estes Park 43 years ago at the death of her father. She came and joined us for a couple weeks, which became a month, and she ended up renting an apartment and stayed here really forever. As many of you know, I'm just going to read this about Barb because it says, Whimsadoodle is more than an arts organization. It's the living legacy of Barb Marshall, a tireless soldier for the creatives in Estes Park. Barb believed that the soul of a town is reflected in its art and that the surest way to elevate a town was to enrich its artistic heart. She dedicated her life to nurturing that soul through the support of local artists, makers, and big dreamers. Following her sudden passing in 2024, Barb's passion lives on through Whimsadoodle, the foundation she entrusted to continue her life's work, enriching the cultural landscape of Estes Park and empowering artists to thrive. When Barb died, she owned about 10 residential and commercial properties in Estes Park. We've really spent the last year since her death assessing those properties. Really, we were fortunate to spend time with Barb before she died in developing a vision and mission for this foundation of hers. We started by looking at the town vision, the development plan, the overall plan from 2018 for Estes Park, and really sort of looked at the places where there were intersections between Barb's vision, what the town was looking for, and what we heard from the arts community, the creatives of Estes, what they wanted. Our vision, Whimsidoodle, is dedicated to strengthening the fabric of the Estes Parks community by supporting its arts and artists. And our mission says Whimsidoodle will work in collaboration with the community to invest in programs and activities that enable artists to thrive. Our priorities include increasing access to housing, studios, collaborative workspaces and venues for exhibition and performance, as well as retail spaces for artists, broadly defined as those working in all fields of the arts and creative endeavors, including those as diverse as culinary arts and craft beverages. So our mission, I mean, we are a not-for-profit with a mission to support Estes Park and its artistic community, its creatives, and therefore foster and support businesses in the Estes Valley and invigorate the health of the community. We have a strong and active board of directors with lots of experience. We have built a wonderful team who are very dedicated and longtime residents of Estes Park. So we're very happy with sort of what we have going on. We have thought about Cleve Street and the properties Barb has there, and our goal is to really enhance the entertainment district there. We see that it will be filled with all sorts of different things that will attract people to Cleve Street. But when we recently purchased the old Haber parking lot, which is adjacent to the Estes Housing Authority building and the parking lot, we realized, or it was brought to our attention, that perhaps by joining those three pieces of property together and doing something that would be larger and more inclusive and really create a feel for Estes, for Cleve Street that we would all like, would really be great. We envision a Cleve Street with restaurants, with a tap room, a beer garden, gallery spaces, shops, a parking garage, coffee shop, bakery, cafe, and typically with first level retail spaces. When we addressed the idea of a parking garage, we understood that the town had looked at building a 3-story structure on the corner, which we thought made a lot of sense. We, among ourselves, have quietly committed that for any of our projects, we'll be cognizant of the parking required. And so even though it may not be required, we're really thinking of that as integral to any project that we touch. We want to be sure that we're thinking about parking. So this became a natural for us, as the idea of collaborating with various other entities is very much a part of what we wanted to do. We went to an architectural firm that I've done a lot of work with in the past. They have a huge portfolio that crosses all sorts of things. They have built parking garages. They do lots of historical restoration work, and they do lots of other creative architecture. We posed to them the question that the existing proposed 3-story garage would hold about 110 spaces. We have 9 or 9.5 units in the Housing Authority building that we needed to replicate or increase. And we wanted the idea of making Cleve Street look what we envisioned the Cleve Street of the future being, where there are attractive, interactive retail spaces on the ground level, residences above, and then this was going to be used for parking. So by doing this, they were able to get, I think, something like 30-odd spaces on the first floor, looking at my notes here, sorry. The ground level has 33 spaces. The second floor, which would be exclusively parking, has 54 spaces, and the third floor with residents has another 30 spaces. So combined, they were able to produce 117 spaces with the residences and retail spaces below. We had them look at what typical apartment units would be. The majority of them are these 1-bedroom, 650-unit spaces, but they're a nice size apartment with a bedroom, a separate kitchen, bath, living area that works. There are 2 larger 2-bedroom units, one larger 2-bedroom unit that would be part of the Housing Authority, and 2 what we're calling artist workspaces, which we would like to think of as being part of Whimsidoodle's mission in terms of providing housing for artists. All in all, they have 8 retail units, which vary from 2 900 square feet, 5 medium at 1,100 square feet each, and then 1 large 1,500 square foot unit. That's all on the first level with 33 spaces. Level 2 has 54 parking spaces. Level 3 has a total of 12 apartments, 10 of which we were thinking would be about a 10% increase from what the Housing Authority currently has, and would allow us to have 2 work-live spaces for artists, assuming all this. Again, this is really conceptual, but this is what they were able to put together for me in a week's time, which I thought was really kind of amazing. Their view of it is they were very respective of what I think of as the nature of downtown Estes Park. We have small retail shops that are individual. There's nothing pretentious about Estes Park. We're very real. They felt that they could replicate that idea so that it wouldn't feel like one big, large development as much as these separate individual spaces that had their own character but were all sort of fitting within the scheme. At the end, really where the parking lot is, this is the corner of Cleve and Bighorn, they talked about creating a beacon, which on the first level is maybe a food and beverage, a bar, a cafe, a restaurant that would spill out onto the street. On the second level, following up this spiral staircase that actually has stairs on the interior curve, but the exterior are what they call social stairs. So they're larger, higher, you can sit on them, you can stop, enjoy a cup of coffee, have an ice cream cone, but they gently pull you up into the next level, which would be a fairly large pop-up space. It could be for music, it could be for an art event, it could be for any number of things. You continue at the spiral up to another level, which is about 1,000 square foot gallery space, which again could be a wonderful gallery for the artists that are living in that area. And they realized actually if they had access to property that Whimsidoodle happens to own, which I think is 211 Bighorn, they could actually make a 4th level on this, which would only be a open air parking with a barrier around it and still stay within the height limitations and get 4 levels and add, I think, another 45 spaces. So we have the potential of having 162 spaces plus the, I think, 10 retail spaces and 12 residences in this spot. The concept also was from downtown, from the corner of Elkhorn and Moraine, you could look and see this that they call the Cleve Street Beacon, that it really directs you to Cleve Street, starts the whole idea of what we envision happening on Cleve Street, where we're drawing people in. It's interactive, it's attractive, it's fun, it's moving. I just think it's great. The other wonderful thing that they did is you don't see any cars in that 3-story parking lot. They've managed to hide everything on the backside, have everything else so that there's a facade in front. It's either covered with a greenery of types or false facades on for the retail above. But I think it's a really wonderful look. So this is a possible vision. It does require working with 3 entities. But we're certainly game to make that work and certainly think there are lots of precedents out there as to how different entities could work together collaboratively to come together to this. Just reviewing what they've done, it's a new mixed-use development in downtown Estes Park that will provide 8 new retail units, 12 new apartments, and over 100 parking spots that are concealed from the main downtown streets. It creates a vibrant social and commercial development along Cleve Street. It creates an icon on the corner of Cleve and Bighorn to extend the activity on Elkhorn up to Cleve Street. It provides accessible and welcoming public spaces for the Estes Park community, and it creates an approachable and seamless circulation route that allows the experience of the development to start at both the Level 1 Plaza as well as levels 2 and 3 of the parking area. If you go back, you see on the east end, there's a spiral staircase that's this inviting way up. On the west end is just a very utilitarian way, again, being cognizant of ADA parking, and that is a fairly long stretch. There are 2 elevators involved and 2 different manual, stairways to go, but the one on the right is really experiential, brings you in, allows you to enjoy the experience as you do the whole thing. Level 1 creates an open plaza on the corner of Cleve Street and Bighorn Drive, provides an outdoor seating space for the adjacent potential food and beverage retail unit, provides an open space for pop-up activities such as performances or makers fairs, provides 8 prominent retail storefronts with necessary trash. You'll notice that I had them make sure we had trash. And on level 1 in the top right, top left corner, so we have trash bins enclosed and within. So I thought that was something we would all appreciate. And create an approachable circulation. Level 2 is concealed but efficient parking level to allow for maximum easily accessible parking to support the commercial activity in downtown Estes Park. And level 3, oops, sorry about that, provides an observation deck on the corner of Cleve Street and Bighorn to provide a unique vantage point overlooking downtown Estes Park, the Park Theater Tower, and scenery beyond to the south. It creates a community gallery space to showcase local artists, especially those living and working in the new development. It would provide 12 new apartment units with 2 dedicated artist live-work units with accompanying private terraces, and maximizes the southern views overlooking Cleve Street and downtown Estes Park, as well as the western views overlooking a planned open courtyard to the west of the development for the apartment units. The 4th optional is if they had access over the 211 Bighorn, there could be a 4th that adds an additional 45 parking spaces, which to me, I mean, suddenly we can get 162 parking spaces on top of the retail and the residences. I think it's really, I think it's amazing what they've come up with. So that's the vision that we have started. Again, this is just a schematic. This is really to get conversation starting in terms of would the trustees support the idea of working on a collaboration, but we are certainly eager and excited by this prospect and think it would be a great addition. We have, the view of just a parking lot compared to something that really is eye-catching, inviting, and would be a wonderful addition to Cleve Street. I'm open to any questions, or should I, is that good?
Cool. What would be the relationship of the town and Whimsidoodle if we were participating in that?
Mayor, if the town board is interested in pursuing this forward, one of the first things that we would look at is what an agreement would look like to kind of merge all 3 of these entities together to make a broader development like this happen. It would not be simple necessarily, but it would be one of those next steps that we would take. So there is nothing identified at this point. We haven't discussed what that would look like in the long term.
So additional study sessions and discussions. Questions and comments?
I've got a question about that 4th level. I didn't
Sure.
understand. That will just be parking.
So what they've described is if they put a ceiling on top of the 3rd level and just had a guardrail around, the guardrail is 42 inches or 48 inches high. At that height, they're below the maximum height requirements or limitations, as I understand it, for downtown.
Okay.
So,
And we go over, I see the residences are shown in the picture as peaked roofs.
I think that's at the front. So it's
You
like,
would not cover that part.
right. I mean, my understanding is, and I think maybe if we look at that, those are all happening in front.
In front here.
And there's that little space. It's sort of like an old western town where there are the storefronts above.
Right, a facade.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks. Well, it is exciting to see that staircase is really compelling. I just love the idea of kind of that open air, bringing outside in from that experience side of things. So conceptually, I'm personally very interested in pursuing, the conversation between staff and the Housing Authority and Whimsidoodle. I think it ticks a lot of boxes for me, things like public-private partnership and nonprofit engagement in that too, not, we work with developers all the time. There's a reason developers do what they do. I understand why they do what they do. It's a rare opportunity to be able to do something like this with somebody who's not necessarily a for-profit. So that really is compelling to me. We talk about redevelopment all the time. So, in particular with this, I think it's really compelling to look at some of that very valuable and limited land asset that we might want to tie into the downtown experience. So that's compelling. Certainly the housing conversation, the expansion of the guest experience too for our community that visits us, and also for our resident community to have an arts center. I think really, certainly from a tourism aspect, I think this would enhance the experience, but for so many of our residents who have arts history, and so much of Estes's history is rooted in the arts, that's really compelling to me too, tying in with the master plan, downtown master plan. Lots of reasons I think that I'd like to see us pursue it. I would be interested, certainly as we get farther down the line into some of those in the weeds things, like fourth floor, right? Like that gives me a little bit of, we'd want to make sure, and you and I have talked about this one-on-one too, and, engagement with the neighbors, like all of those things we talk about with all these big projects. But I think those are way farther down the way. But for now, I think it would be, frankly, I can't imagine not wanting to pursue this and see what we could come up with, and hopefully it's something wonderful, because I think this is a rare opportunity for the town to think creatively and maximize, the goodwill of a resident who gave a lot to our community. So that's where I would be.
Thank you, Trustee Hazelton.
I've been very interested to see how the vision of Cleve Street would continue. I've loved the idea of the added dimension to downtown. There are many issues and challenges that over time, I hope to see the evolution beyond those and to a nicely integrated. This is a wonderful vision. I would support proceeding with looking at it, exploring it, if that's the right word.
Thank you, Mayor.
I am interested, and I'm local, and I'm watching what's going on there. So I think it's a really interesting opportunity for what Trustee Hazelton mentioned. That there's a lot of parts of what we are working on, what we're challenged with all the time, that this may be able to answer. I like that you can't see any cars, but there's 117 maybe plus spaces that are there. So there are a lot of questions. My first view of this, and depending on your perspective and how you come into this, I don't paint very well. I'm not an artist really, but I can see how this would be attractive to some people, and it would be an absolute turnoff to other people in a mountain town. So I think that being able to find something that worked for our community would be good. But I have a sense that you might be the folks, your team might be the ones to make this work. So I'm interested in moving forward and finding out more about it. It is interesting to me. Some of the questions that come to mind quickly, Walt, are we keep talking about how Cleve Street is activating things and activating pedestrians, and it's taking on a little life of its own, which is somewhat consistent with our pedestrian focus and our downtown plan. When that activation of other businesses in the area takes place, and the views are suddenly diminished because West Elkhorn has the front row and the opportunity, I just wonder how that's going to integrate with this project. If there is additional business participation in making Cleve Street a different, vibrant place, how will that impact this project? And those views on the third floor might not be the same thing. Just like the views for the cabins on the other side of Bighorn right now are not going to be the same thing were this to come to pass. So those are considerations, what the businesses and the property owners on Cleve Street, what their input is, what the feeling is. This does create a large parcel on Cleve Street, and there's some sentiment of ownership or control by how much land someone owns, and I think this is a community conversation to have, and not just one for each landowner that touches that parcel to have, which may touch on several other issues we'll talk about tonight. And I think it's something for our community to talk about. Thank you for the presentation. It's a fascinating idea.
Thank you, Trustee Heil.
I love it. I think it's great. And I think the time is right. The things have come together. You know, if you'd come to us a year or 2 years from now, we might have been too far down the road with the parking structure. This is definitely the time things are coming together. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's innovative. I do agree with Mark. I know this is just conceptual.
Exactly.
But I would like to see the architecture look like Colorado mountain architecture and not something that belongs in Rhino. You know, it is different. There is a mountain architectural look and a feel for Estes Park. And, but I know the designers can do that, and this is just conceptual. I like the idea of the plaza in the corner. Yeah, I think we ought to explore it, absolutely.
Thank you.
I too am excited about this concept of the three entities working together. I think we can accomplish a lot of those needs. The strong need or the strong feeling I have about the parking structure that we were looking at was the effect it was going to have on the housing in that building right next to it, and that bothers me. You know, to block those windows from those residents that are there, and I don't know that that building has too much life left anyway. So I think it checks a lot of our boxes. I think it's a great opportunity to work with nonprofit. I think is, like you mentioned, is exciting. A little bit of hesitation is, you know, I know this is going to take a lot more time to move forward on something like this. And so my questions are then, what can we do in the meantime to take care of our parking needs? Yeah, can we be creative in some other spots along that cleave with partners that we can do a temporary parking areas? So that's one of my concerns. I don't want to wrap this piece of land up for so long that when we need our parking immediately.
Right.
But I don't want to make the wrong decision by moving too quickly either.
And not to commit to anything, but we, Whimsadoodle, do own a piece of property on the west end that we were looking to permit for a design that, as we reviewed it, maybe wasn't as complete and as good as it could be. And so we have put the brakes on that for a moment, which means that we do have that empty lot. We envision doing something in the interim to revitalize that and to make that an interesting spot on Cleve Street. So that's what our first choice would be. But if in fact there is an ongoing need for parking, which I think was maybe felt more strongly before the change happened, and I'm not sure how much of a need there actually actively is for additional parking now, you know, we might have a place where we could actually put another 40 cars or something like that. But we would prefer seeing that as something that was more active and engaging and attractive to people rather than just a temporary parking lot.
Right, right.
But we do have that option.
But, okay. So that's a concern of mine but it definitely, I think, warrants moving forward, having more discussion to see, you know, what those timelines would look like, the cost, and if we could collaborate with the three entities and, of course, get feedback from our residents. To me, I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
A little hesitant on the timeline and all that, but I think it's very important that we do it right the first time instead of going, oh gosh. So I'm glad you brought it to us now instead of a couple of years.
Right.
Like
My
like
concern
so.
was 10 years down the line, we would say, why didn't we do
Right,
this? We
yeah.
had that opportunity and
Yeah.
we totally missed
So
it.
I'm definitely in favor of investigating it further and working with the other entities.
Great. Thank you, Trustee.
I'm very excited about it, just like these others. I think the most exciting part is it being a public-private partnership too, because we could use more of those in this community. We don't seem to have a lot of them. And there are other parcels of property where that might be appropriate for. And so dealing with an entity like Whimsadoodle that we know and trust is an important part of this. Now, one question for you and another question. The conceptual thing covers all three lots, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the
So
lot,
that is,
the parking lot that you've got would be part of that too.
exactly.
And the other question I have is, where does that put us with our contract with our design build people or our designers for the parking ramp? And is that something we can stop without great liability?
So we did, you'll notice on your agenda that we did back these two items up. The next item on your agenda is a Bighorn parking structure update, and
We'll
our
talk about that,
project manager
Okay.
will do
okay,
a
I'll
wonderful
wait
job
then.
of communicating what our options are, given this interest from the board, some of the challenges we saw with the parking structure itself, and then options for moving
I
forward.
think this is a tremendous opportunity and great vision. Pretty impressed you could put this together in a week.
I was pretty, I expected them to do something much more simple than
Yeah,
this.
this
And I
is
thought,
pretty good.
this is very eye-catching.
Okay,
and-
I think we're going to be all in favor, I suspect, so thank you.
Great. Thank you, Trustee Brown.
I'm not going to repeat everything everybody said. But in summary, everybody was said, I think everybody's excited about the possibilities.
Great.
And I do agree with the concept, although I think the picture is beautiful. I do believe that anything can be done.
Right.
And using that concept in more of a mountain feel, I think is a good thought. I don't think this has anything to do with what it's going to look like exactly, so I'm not worried about that. I've always thought that Cleve Street was underutilized, and I kind of wanted to make a Frenchman Street there ages ago. So I think bringing something like that to Cleve Street may help even West Elkhorn feel a bit more included again in downtown. So I think it's a great concept, and I think that there's a lot of support for us to at least look at it
Great.
and keep going forward.
Thank you very much.
Oh, there you go. I think we have the direction.
Thanks, Mayor. Derek, you might have your work cut out for you on this next one.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Walt.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
It didn't take great arithmetic skills to figure that out. Bighorn parking structure design update.
Does it look like this?
Here we go. There we go. Okay. So yeah, my presentation isn't going to be nearly that that elaborate, but I think I can answer some of the questions and kind of piggyback on what was discussed before. Trustee Brown, you mentioned you had questions about the contract with Desmond that we have right now. I may need, Attorney Kramer's help on that, but I have had conversations with Desmond. They are very eager to work on this idea. They're capable of it. They have that experience of doing a multi-use, mixed-use structure. In my mind, I was thinking we would treat this as a change order and continue that process. If we have the ability to terminate the contract and resolicit for a competitive bid process, we would go that route. But Attorney Kramer, do you know without looking at the contract?
Not exactly, but we'll have options, and you've laid them out. This would be the biggest change order I've ever heard of. But if they're on board to keep working with us, then anything is possible. And whether that's an amendment or a change order or termination and something new, we can work through that.
Does that answer your okay? So kind of in the timeline
Derek,
of
do you want to speak really quickly to where the active work on that project currently stands? We're not currently spending money on this while we wait to get further guidance, correct?
That is correct. So the purpose of tonight was to be able to present to you some conceptual drawings and renderings, which was in your packet. About a month ago, and we'll see if I can. Okay. So again, just a little bit of backstory. It's meant, updating Cleve Street was in the master plan and the downtown parking management plan. We've been to the board a couple times for this, and back in April, we engaged with Desmond to begin the construction or the design work on that. Along the way through this process, we've had a couple meetings with community development as part of the pre-planning, pre-development, and community development has identified a couple of issues and concerns that I want to bring to you all today and kind of give you an update on where we are. But we had one meeting in May, one meeting in June with community development, and after that second meeting in June, I kind of hit timeout with Desmond and said, let's get our eggs in a row, or eggs in a basket and ducks in a row, however that works. But exactly. And so they're fine. they're totally on board with just hitting pause and letting us make sure we're moving forward on the right path and getting the right product for the town. So a couple issues that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the property line setbacks of the parking lot. We're going to talk about the driveway access and the spacing requirements for those different entrances. And then also, as Walt mentioned in his presentation, talking about pedestrian activation. Also in this presentation, we're going to talk about the parking inventory. Now that we have a conceptual drawing and renderings, we can get a little bit better numbers than the original presentation that our town engineers came up with. And then also an up-to-date budgeting summary, kind of see where we are right now. So did that touch on, okay. So the first issue is the property line setbacks. So the image on the, what side is that? The left? I swear I'm good. So the red line is the current property line, and then the setbacks, there's an 8-foot setback requirement around that property. Desmond and myself were trying to operate on the assumption that we could expand that to have a 0-line setback. Community development came back and said, no, actually the code says we need 8 feet on all sides. And so community development proposed that yellow section, kind of vacating some of the right-of-way off of Bighorn and incorporating it into the parking lot. So that way we would kind of maximize our property line and maximize parking spaces. Going with the image on the right would give us about 12 to 15 additional spaces per level. Or sorry, total, 4 to 5 spaces per level. And again, please interrupt, ask questions along the way as you go, as I go. The next one was talking about the driveway spacing and the accessibility of those spaces. The Estes Park Development Code and the Larimer County Urban Area Street Standards, Lucas, have different requirements and criteria. If we were to follow the development code, it would effectively eliminate one level of parking. We just don't have enough space to make that curve around Bighorn. And we're also concerned about the 30 feet of space between the driveway and the intersection. So on Cleve Street, the intersection of Cleve Street and Bighorn and that driveway access on Cleve Street. We just think it's too close. And we think it may be a pedestrian safety hazard, having that so close together. So we would recommend following the Lucas recommendations of having a minimum distance of 30 feet between driveways and a minimum of 100-foot distance between the driveway and the intersection of Cleve Street and Bighorn. And so I had Desmond map that out, and we would still maximize as much space as we can. And we would push the entrance on Cleve Street as far as we could as well, just to give maximum safe clearances for the pedestrians to walk and cross along Bighorn and Cleve Street. The next section is the pedestrian.
Actually, sorry, could I interrupt there for a second? So, for this second one, have you talked with community development about what would be required in order to use the Lucas standards rather than our current development?
Oh,
code
sorry,
standards?
yes.
Is that
It's a
development
Board of
code change?
Adjustments variance request.
Okay, got it. So just so everyone understands, if it's a variance request, that's not something that would come to this board. Still wouldn't make sense for this board to give an opinion in advance as to what the Board of Adjustment should do. That'll be a full process before the Board of Adjustment.
Sorry, okay, yes. So the downtown master plan encourages and suggests, pedestrian activation. It's identified Cleve Street as a priority edge. The plan promotes the mixing of uses, all of that. And one of the requirements the community development suggested or has is the bottom floor has to have a 12-foot clearance from floor to ceiling. And our designers were basing their designs on a typical parking structure of having an 8.5-foot clearance. So trying to make up that 3.5-foot clearance has some problems. They've had successful designs with the 8.5-foot clearance in a mixed-use space, running utilities through the structural supports, raceways, things like that. So again, an 8.5-foot clearance isn't unheard of in a mixed-use space. Wrong way. So I have an image on the next page, but if we were to raise that bottom level 3 feet, it would actually affect that third level entrance. And right now that entrance is about 10 to 15 feet deep. So raising it 3 feet is going to make it pretty steep. And we don't know yet at the time of this, and I put Desmond on pause, so I didn't have them do further evaluations, but there's a concern that the steepness of that driveway may make it not functional or not practical. The other part of this is thinking forward to that upper level of housing. We have a maximum total building height per code, and raising it up 3 feet is going to squish that fourth floor housing. Right now, we're planning on it being about 18 feet tall, that fourth floor for housing, and this would make it about 15 feet tall, which is going to make it really tight for ceiling clearances, utilities, the roof line, all that kind of stuff. So again, just something to think about. We don't touch a lot on the pedestrian activation. This is a parking structure. You know, there's no plans for anything in the proposal that Walsh has had. But again, the downtown master plan is just recommendations. They're not requirements. They're not, regulations. So again, just something to think about moving along. Next section is parking inventory. You've seen this image before. This is what myself and one of our staff engineers came up with when we were just brainstorming on what a parking structure could look like. In this rendering, we were planning for about 136 parking spaces. Once we engaged with Desmond, we learned a lot more. These are things that we just didn't know about, think about, consider in building a parking structure. Taking all of those into account, there's 2 renderings here. One of them, you'll notice the driveway on the 3rd level is shorter. That is based on the setbacks. So if we have the 0-foot setback or the 8-foot setback, is really going to affect the parking counts. But here's kind of a summary table. In the original design that the town staff came up with, we were planning on about 136 parking spaces. Depending on the setbacks, that would reduce to between 122 and 110 because of all those other factors that we talked about, the elevator, the stairs, the turning radius, the structural beams, things like that. So again, just things to think about. And then current budget position. So we talked about the contract a little bit. The board approved this project for design for $600,000. Contract with Desmond is for $458,000. To date, getting us to this conceptual point is a little bit over $55,000. There's been a couple of other expenses that we've incurred, and then one more that we will incur. Again, I put the geotechnical study on hold because I didn't want to commit to something, especially if we're going to do the PPP. That geotechnical study is going to expand as well. So that's on hold as well, and that contractor is fine with that. Wow, I guess I kind of just rushed all through this, but this is kind of the ideas of things that I'm looking for. Is the town board comfortable with staff moving forward with the idea of vacating the portion of the right-of-way on Bighorn to expand the setbacks and give us a larger parking surface area? Again, that would just be through community development, and I believe that is also a Board of Adjustments. No, I think that's just community development approval.
Derek, I think at this point, given the direction in the previous conversation, the previous agenda item, unless the board wants us to continue on parallel paths here and continue spending money on this project, some of these things are things that we would probably put in our back pocket if just in case a different idea did not materialize, this new concept did not materialize. These are things that we could come back to, but we probably don't need the board direction or feedback on this specific set of questions.
And a lot of these items, if we move forward with the partnership, will be addressed, in those designs. Now that we know what we're up against, we can address those along the way. So, I guess really the direction is, do you want me to continue to engage with Desmond or continue to keep them on pause and work out the partnership? I think is the direction.
Yeah, I think based on the last conversation, we will continue to have that contract on pause and we'll consult with legal on next steps relative to this other concept that's come forward today.
I just wanted to, I think that's correct based on my interpretation, but I just wanted to say that I appreciated the input about the Lucas guidelines, because I think that keeping that a pedestrian focused or that kind of safe and comfortable feel back there, I really appreciated that you guys kept that focus and made that recommendation. I think I'd like to continue to see that prioritized as we go, pursue this, and making sure. I can just imagine some kid running around a corner and, when you walk around downtown Denver and the parking garage opens and somebody comes flying out, kind of thing. So thanks for that attention to that.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned on the whole project. I've been thinking about this, about if somebody's up on that hill and they want to walk downtown, that currently is a bit of a problem too, because, and the setback at 0 would make it worse, I think. So I think we need to consider pedestrians, and the other thing is consider whether we abandon parking on Bighorn there too. I think that would almost have to happen with the entries to the parking structure, which is, I don't know if that's counted in the lost spaces. Or not.
Yes.
Is it? Okay.
Yep. So on this image, the one on the right, that yellow section would be the portion of Bighorn that we were wanting to vacate and incorporate into.
Yeah.
That
I'd
would
like to
also become a sidewalk, though.
Right. I'd
So
like
that
to
would-
see a sidewalk going up there. It would improve safety for sure.
Yep.
And eliminating the parking would help too.
And we're looking at, I think it's 14. Yeah, we're looking at losing approximately 14 parallel parking
Those are
on
the
Bighorn.
parallel spaces then.
Yep, along Bighorn to account for the entrances.
Now, there's some parallel spaces on the other side too, partway up.
Yeah, we wouldn't affect those.
Those would be, okay. It would just be the ones on the south side of the street. Okay. With that caveat, that's the one thing I was worried about, is the pedestrian access down Bighorn.
Yeah. Yeah, so all those parking spaces on the north of Bighorn wouldn't be affected.
And I would mention too, that if you look at the various plans, the Whimsidoodle plan had the entry to the parking garage way further west. And I think that's a great idea anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm a little concerned about the Board of Adjustment on the driveway spacing for the access, because one of the rules, as I understand it, is that a change has to not be a major change. And going from 150 feet to whatever feet this is could well be a major change. But having said that, we are also in the process of revisiting our development code and could address that in the course of doing that. And it could be an amendment to the development code before that, for that matter. So I think we can manage that. It's just that that is more than a typical Board of Adjustment problem, I think. And so we need to be cognizant of that as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would think we put everything on hold for now, but I do have one question. And maybe you said it and I just totally missed it, and one of my days is out. Did y'all look at going down a little bit on the first level?
So on Cleve Street itself?
Yeah, so that the spacing wouldn't be as much of an issue?
Yeah, so actually Cleve Street, that parking lot is sloped in such a way, there's about a 3 to 5 foot difference from the east to the west. And I can't remember which way it slopes, but we talked about going to the lowest end and making that the level surface to give us the maximum height.
Okay,
But no, I didn't say that before, but yeah.
okay,
Did that answer your question?
pretty much.
Okay.
Thanks.
Looking at the agenda, I thought the Cleve Street update was going to be different. I thought we were going to talk about, hey, here's where we're at, this is what we did.
Okay.
We didn't do that at all. And Cleve Street is really going to be an opportunity for us to talk about town processes, planning, working with the neighbors and doing projects well. And there are some things about the Cleve Street project that are concerning to me. I'm hearing several comments that really are indicating that Cleve Street is a pedestrian mall and that Cleve Street has evolved and it's something different than it has been sold as and has been operated as. So Cleve Street, as I understand it, and there are individuals in the room who can clarify my words or my facts if I have them incorrectly remembered, but throughout the process of Cleve Street, that street is a shared street. It is a street that is open to all traffic, to both directions. It's a street that now is giving priority to pedestrians and to bicycles. It is a street that appears to be a pedestrian mall, and with the addition of planters in the next few days or weeks or however long that takes, it is really going to look like somewhere else, like something that it has evolved into. So I want to not caution, but I want to bring it to the attention of the staff and the trustees that this project is a shared street. There are businesses that are operating every day that rely on that access for access. If it is going to become a pedestrian mall, we need to be very careful about getting into that, considering everyone that's impacted by that, and not making decisions from our podium where we are not involved daily with that project. There's a list of shortcomings that I can call out, and there are a list of successes that I can call out with Cleve Street. I thought we were going to have that conversation tonight. Not that we're not having that tonight, because we didn't have packet material, and it's been on the agenda for a long time, a Cleve Street update. So I'm not asking for that per se, but Trustee Hazelton mentioned, I like the direction we're going with pedestrians. Walt mentioned it's going to be pedestrian focused. And I don't want to argue with that completely, but it is not realistic to cut out deliveries and access by vehicles that use internal combustion motors to do business in our community. So I'm taking this long time to call that out to say, we do need to be respectful of the downtown plan, the transportation plan, but we also need to remember that that plan is how did you say it? It's a recommendation. Our downtown plan is not a requirement, much like the comprehensive plan is a guidance tool, and it's not a set of rules. So I appreciate the opportunity to make that point as I operate a business that relies on that access on that street. And I was elected here to advocate for everyone impacted by this project and other projects, but that one I'm very familiar with. So I'm standing up at this point to say, we can't make it a pedestrian mall today. Okay. Thank you for your work. It's been very interesting to see how the parking structure has developed. Yeah. But I have to say, I like Walt's project better.
You're not going to hurt my feelings.
I don't want to hurt your feelings because you worked so hard and you do a good job. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Trustee Eigel is right that in the foreseeable or reasonable future, it's a different kind of mixed-use street. Pedestrians, as well as other traffic, as well as deliveries, have to deal with the trash situation, temporary and long-term. I do think that there's a point in the future where there's additional evolution that happens on that street, just like happens on a lot of streets, and especially in our very intense and busy downtown corridor. I see a point in the future where somehow, and I don't know what all the steps are to get there, each individual business along the way, but that there are evolutions that will get us to some long-term future. But in the relative short-term, midterm, Trustee Eigel's right. We have to take all of that into consideration, allow the businesses to thrive, do their deliveries, take care of their output.
Two items that may be relevant. First, to Trustee Eigel's question or point, My understanding is this item, the Cleve Street redevelopment update, was added as a redevelopment update by Trustee Brown in December. We did have a Cleve Street project update a couple of months ago. I do not have an additional Cleve Street project update on my list after the high impact project process review, but we could certainly add a Cleve Street. So point taken about engagement. I heard a lot about that in the last study session agenda item. The second piece, and I think it's important to recognize what Trustee Eigel is saying, it is a shared street. Town staff continues to operate under the assumption that this will be a shared street in perpetuity. When we look at the downtown plan and we see as staff, we see pedestrian activation, we see Elkhorn Avenue. That's a pedestrian activated street. It's not a ped street. There is significant traffic on Elkhorn Avenue, but there is ground floor shopping, there's ground floor activities. You don't just have blank office space or dead first floor uses. You have uses that are drawing pedestrians in, that are creating a sense of activity at the street level. So when we hear and we see as staff pedestrian activation, we're not seeing that's coming into the street. We're seeing that means that there's pedestrian activities on that main floor, whereas a parking garage, when you have a string of cars, doesn't really satisfy that.
I have a few questions about the contract, and I know we may not have those, but I mean, I think the information we've got from what we've done so far is going to be valuable, no matter which direction we go. But do we have a timeline with them? I mean, they're graciously putting everything on hold, but was there a conversation of, yes, we can hold for 30 days, or yes, we can hold for 90 days? I mean, what are we looking at? Because I certainly don't want to lose any more money.
Right.
And I think we need to be conscious of whatever it is that says that in the contract, and also what they're willing to do.
Sure. So, and again, I need to refer to the contract specifically. I think the language is generic enough that says the contract is complete when the scope of work is satisfied, meaning that we get to, for Desmond, it is getting to construction documents. Okay. And what we did in the process is I identified key milestones along the way. And that actually, I made some notes. Getting us through conceptual drawings, or getting us through construction documents, would have us ending the contract in December or January of this year. Now, obviously, we've lost a month being on pause, so that would be shifted a little bit. But that gives you a kind of a sense that the contract is roughly going to be done in the first quarter of 26. But again, it gets back to your question of how long can we put this on pause? Before we engaged with Desmond, and we were having conversations with the other contractor in negotiating their prices, Desmond was really good again at that time, and they put us on pause, and we're like, okay, if we engage with you, but we don't engage with you for 6 months, what would that price fee structure look like? And they worked on that. So we have a price that's good through the end of this project, but I would have to have a conversation with them to say how long could we put it on pause before we incur costs.
Okay. I would like to just make sure that we're having those conversations and open communication, because I think that's an important piece that needs to be in the forefront as we move forward, so that way we can do it in a timely, inexpensive manner.
No, I've had very good conversations. We've had I can call them up on a whim and they'll answer my phone calls.
Okay.
We have meetings whenever we need to. They're actually expecting a phone call from me tomorrow to give them an update on tonight. So right now I have a very good relationship with them, and it's just the question I just need to ask.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And Trustee Youngland, I could read to you. I just pulled up the contract, or at least what I think the contract is, and I can read to you from that. But honestly, like you're saying, there's only so far we can go if they're not willing to work on what would be a significant change. Right. So it's mostly going to depend on their willingness to start something new.
This is kind of a sideline to this, but directed at staff. I know sometimes different codes and guidelines are a little bit different, but I was kind of surprised how much the development code and the street standards, I mean, they're off by 500% and 300%. It's a lot. So I just wanted to say, can we make sure we put a pin in that when we do the development code, we do comparisons side by side and see, I mean, if we were off by a few feet, one was 150 and was 140, I don't care. But, 150 feet and 30 feet, that's a pretty big difference. I'm sure there was a lot of reasoning went in when the county did theirs. I'm sure there's a lot of reasoning went into ours. But I think there is some value in consistency. So if we could just put a pin in that and we look at those two codes and make sure we get them, if possible, as consistent as possible, it'd be great.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the discussion of Trustee Eigel and the mayor. I do believe that street has been designed to be a street. It's not designed to be a pedestrian mall. It is way more pedestrian friendly than the prior street, for sure. But I don't see any time in my lifetime that will not be a street. I can envision closing the street for street parties of various sorts. I think the merchants along there may like that. They would do it at times that would be consistent with their delivery schedules, I'm sure. So that's kind of what I see. And yes, it could iterate into a pedestrian street at some point. And, we have proven our ability to do that by what happened with Hicks Plaza. It's the same sort of thing because there was, I think, and they get deliveries on Hicks Plaza somehow. I don't know how they do it, but they do. But I think it behooves us for it to remain a street for the foreseeable future for a variety of reasons, but be more pedestrian friendly than it was in the past. And this will surely help spur redevelopment of the area too. And that's part of the reason I'm so excited about a public-private partnership because, we've done a lot of the public side of this by improving the street already. The parking will be part of it, but basically the rest of it's all going to be private development. And it has to be attractive to developers. And I think we've made it more attractive to developers so as to facilitate the downtown plans. So I personally do not see that as a pedestrian mall, certainly during my lifetime and probably during Mark's lifetime for that matter. But, who knows what happens. The mayor thinks we're going to have self-driving flying cars, I think. So we do have self-driving cars. They're just not flying yet. So anyway, so that I just wanted to point that out. It is designed as a street. It will remain a street. And I think people need to realize that.
Yeah, 100 years ago, there was probably some board sitting here envisioning what the future is. And, future's a big place, and we'll see. In the meantime, we have to stay practical as well as move in good directions. What else do you need from us?
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks much. We'll move on to item 3 on the study session. I see all these forces mobilizing. The Water Master Plan Collaborative Development of Treatment Alternatives. Probably something to do with our 2 water plants and the big future ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, for that preliminary introduction. Yeah, that's actually the truth. This is a pretty exciting topic for us. It's the start of a bigger conversation around our master plan that we'll roll out. I want to point out a couple people real quick. We have Mike here with us. Mike is with the construction supervisor. James Rossi is with us tonight. He's actually, Dantimo, thank you. Mike Dantimo, he's our capital construction supervisor. James Rossi is the treatment plant supervisor, comes with a lot of background from the Seattle area, South Seattle area. Jason Fredericks, and Jackie Wesley comes quite a bit with, she's our project manager. So I will quickly introduce this. I'm waiting for the expertise use of the computer by Jackie, the other Jackie. Water development, collaborative development. So as we discussed, Water 101, Water 102, Water 102 kind of set on the condition assessment of the water system. You might remember the glacier water treatment plant is definitely past its useful life. And so this discussion is wrapped around the idea that we need to do something. We know we need to do something. And so the work was basically to try and address that one subject. So our agenda will go through the purpose and the approach of this method that we use, collaborative development to build consensus. We did identify the fact that we do have a need for a year-round treatment plant that runs reliably, discussion of the 2 treatment plants, synthesis of the team's position, and the next steps. So at this point, I am going to hand it off to Jackie.
Hello. We used an approach called constructive controversy that was first developed by David Johnson and Roger Johnson. And it's a structured approach to take multiple sides of an argument and kind of build a consensus on the best path forward. Not everybody will absolutely agree with everything, but it does build that consensus to let you take the next steps. It's a pretty structured program. It's something Travis brought to us and suggested we try, and it was a very fun exercise. I think everybody who participated in it really enjoyed the opportunity to share and discuss things from that type of structured approach. There are really 5 steps. Each team prepares their position. They look at the pros and cons of their position on the side of an argument, and then they do a presentation. So each team will present and advocate for their position. The other team then evaluates what they said, refutes it, and they each refute the opposite side's position and say, why you were right or wrong, and how we're smarter than you are and all that. So then you switch sides. So A becomes B and B becomes A, and you argue in favor of your opposite position. And that's where I thought they really kind of brought it all together, because you really had to advocate for the opposite of what you originally thought. And then the teams come back together and discuss it and say, where do we agree? What can we say? We agree with these steps. Let's figure out what to do next. So what did we argue about? What did we talk about? Well, we looked at, do we have 1 plant or 2 plants in Estes Park? Historically, we've had a lot of plants. Typically the plants were built closer to the water source. Right now we've got 2. We've had up to 4, I believe, operating at similar times, or some were mothballed and starting up, and so it's multiple plants. But the discussion has been around for a long time. Should we go down to a single plant that operates year-round consistently and reliably? So we split into 2 teams, and we had creatively a 1-plant team and a 2-plant team. And I asked them to take all the existing work that had been done through, I guess, since the '85 master plan really, and provided data to both teams to say, hey, kind of build on this data. Don't reinvent the wheel, but build on what we've already looked at. We all recognize that investments in the system are really going to be required no matter what. So as Ruben mentioned, that condition assessment done by our consultant really pointed out that Glacier's at or beyond its useful life, and Mary's has got some issues associated with how it can perform and its ability to have any redundancy added. So we knew we were going to have to invest money somehow. Let's figure out the best way to do it. Do we continue operating with the 2 plants that we have? Do we look at 2 plants in general, or do we consolidate into a single plant? We did ask the teams to not get into specific locations or specific treatment technologies. Those discussions are in themselves long-winded and can go on for a while. So let's just focus on 1 versus 2. And then we set a peak day demand of 6 MGD. In a couple weeks, we're going to come back to you guys with a demand and population projection information that kind of refutes that 6 MGD, that's a little too big. But you'll see that on the July 22nd study session. And then we also asked both teams to assume that adequate water rights existed for whatever we were going to do. Might take some movement of those water rights, but they are there. So how did we form these teams? We wanted each team to have a representative from management, from treatment, from water quality, and from distribution. And then we took Mike D'Antimo and stuck him on both teams because I think it was his 2nd week of work. So, we didn't want to make him be on a single team. And then I think Jason Fredericks is going to talk through what each team's position it was.
Thanks, Jackie. So the next segment of the presentation provides the main points and approach that the teams focused on to support their perspectives. So starting with the one year-round treatment plant, this team's focus was mainly on efficiency, compliance, and redundancy. And then along with safety, how we manage it, what cost savings that we can introduce for to utilize for that approach, and then how we also are managing our water system. So the one plant team findings were largely just focused on efficiency. And so what we mean by that is simplification of the treatment process that enables the focus on one process and increases operator intimacy, or the amount of time it takes an operator to become fully effective at understanding operations on a greater level. So basically, this is the difference between knowing just how to run a plant and intimacy is being able to run it, troubleshoot it effectively, identifying changes, and then take action to resolve that. So, you know, a new operator you might say that they are, able to run a plant in a year or two, excuse me. But developing that kind of intimacy with the plant takes more time than that. So usually 3 to 5 years, or sometimes more, depending on that level of the treatment process and what you have going on there. So that was something that the one team plant identified as a major point that we were trying to make. And then the second was, or the next was future planning for regulatory compliance. The current and future regulatory requirements would be addressed by utilizing the best available treatment technology, which is a term that's commonly used in water treatment. So what processes are in place to provide the best treatment is essentially what we're saying there. So that would be able to address emerging contaminants such as PFAs, which has been in the news a lot. So I think everybody's probably familiar with those. And addressing microplastics, disinfection byproducts, taste and odor issues. So a lot of things like that can be addressed with the new plant, single plant approach. And then redundancy, designing internal and external redundancies in a single plant approach was some of the things that were argued for or pointed out from the one plant team. So now moving on to the two treatment plants, this team focused on diversity of location as being one of the key points that are trying to be pointed out there, and then reducing single point failure. And then other focuses were also on staff familiarity with the existing two plant operations that we have now, and supporting our existing system, as well as emphasizing existing investments that we've made. So the findings from the two plant, diversity of location, having two plants in different locations reduces the potential impacts to the water system through separation. You've got two plants in different locations. So if one were to be compromised, the other would be available. And this multiple plant approach has served Estes Park well as a historical approach. Then also one plant can be taken out of service to complete significant upgrades if needed without impacting the ability to meet our needs by utilizing the other plant. And then another focus was reducing single points of failure, in that the Estes Park is the only water system in the area, which means that if we had a major failure, we wouldn't be able to utilize an emergency connection point with another utility. So, or a natural disaster, anything like that. So, and then both teams focused on safety and cyber and site security, and meeting the town's missions and objectives and goals. Both teams were able to bring forth ideas that meet these objectives. So thank you. Yeah, I think Jackie's going to continue here.
So how did we bring this together? Both of the teams had some things that were in common. We all recognized the redundancy of supply and treatment was really critical for us to continue to provide reliable water. So if something happens to a water source, we've got another water source. If something happens to a treatment train or a plant, we've got another way to treat water. That process redundancy can be achieved at a single site. There's been some discussion amongst folks saying, hey, we have to have 2 plants in order to have full redundancy. You can achieve full redundancy at a single site with proper design and by building in redundant treatment trains. And then our operators are really talented, but switching back and forth with different water sources and completely different types of treatment is a real challenge for them. So they make that change. Each plant operates part of the year. And when they switch to the other one, it's a totally different plant and a totally different water. We also recognize that our existing plants are not really set up to have that redundancy. Neither plant has built-in redundancy. They've got a little bit here. They may have an extra pump or they may have an extra, pipeline, but they're not fully redundant. So if something happens to a portion of the plant, there is no ability in that existing plant to have redundant treatment. It also makes it really hard to expand it or add additional treatment trains if we need to because of those changing regulations. Regs don't get easier as time goes by. They always get harder. And they identify more and more things that we need to treat water for. And adding more unit processes is going to be important for us to maintain treatability in the future. We also all recognize that the cost of achieving our reliable, high-quality water service with our existing plants is going to be high. So what else does this mean? If we have multiple water sources, then we have ability to treat water if something happens to one of the sources. Redundancy in treatment trains and equipment, again, allows us to take one or more trains out of service. It could be maintenance, it could be a failure in the unit, or it could be that we just need to make changes in how a treatment unit or process works. And we can still meet our peak day demand. Our treatment plant sites right now are not hardened particularly well. They're okay, but they could always use more hardening. So, reducing risk and impacts from natural disasters and man-made disasters is really important. So both teams recognize that as something to really focus on. And that man-made disaster could include things, if you think about cybersecurity. We hear news releases all the time about hackers and attacks on systems, and your credit card number gets stolen from the grocery store or whatever. So the same thing happens in water systems, that we're always on guard for that cybersecurity element. And then again, expandability of the plant. We don't think we're going to need to add more capacity based on what we've seen from our consultant, but that is a prediction. And we all know how predictions go, so they could vary. So maybe capacity would be needed. We want to have a plant that if we had to add capacity, we could. We will definitely need to change treatment processes as regs continue to develop. So we would need to be able to add other process elements. So how can we do all this? Bring the water rights independently to a treatment plant or plants. So bringing it to a single site location independently, so separate pipes, separate ways to get there, is important. Constructing that new plant that's expandable, that has multiple redundant trains so that you can have one train off and still meet our peak day demand. We need to complete some required maintenance and improvements at Mary's Lake. When we start a new plant up, as Jason mentioned, new operators take 3 to 5 years. Well, a new plant takes a while to get going to, and for us to learn it, and for it to be fully functional, and for it to be something that we can feel how it works. And then decommission Glacier. It's in poor condition, and the cost of improving Glacier would be significant unless there was a drastic change in what was being done there.
So you'd be piping water from at least both sources to some common location?
Yeah, we finished, one of our consultants finished a study looking at the redundant raw water to Mary's Lake. I think that was a board objective at one point. And the cost for just the piping and pumping was $30 million. And then process improvements at the front of the plant was another $30 million. So for $60 million, all you did was get water to Mary's Lake. You didn't fix any of the redundancy issues in Mary's Lake, and it doesn't fix any of that reliability issue in Mary's Lake. That's a lot to spend just to get the water there. So that's, fed a lot into these discussions of 60 million bucks, and we still didn't solve the problems at Mary's Lake. We just got water there. What comes next? We're going to talk to you in 2 weeks about the population and demand projections. We hired an economist to go look at that, and they did a bunch of work looking at previous studies, talked to the national park. So you'll hear about that in 2 weeks. That then feeds into the completion of the master plan, because we really need to have that capacity decided. And getting your feedback from this study session, the next study session, and from our consultants will be important to completing that master plan. And then we really want to look at the cost. A lot of what we have talked about and what our cost estimates, it's really challenging in today's environment to get an accurate cost estimate. You watch what happened with Upper Thompson. They had a number, and then it was a different number, and then it was a different number. So we'd really like to get a little bit better sense of what the actual costs are for these things. I talked about that water study for Mary's Lake, and I was really surprised that it was 60 million bucks and still no improvements at the plant. And then we'd like to initiate planning and identification of funding sources. We've preliminarily looked into an EPA program called WIFIA, and they have a 35-year loan that starts 5 years after construction, and it's got flexible repayment terms, so you can pay less upfront if you want to retire old debt and more later on, and kind of adjustable. But we need to do a little more research on that before we bring more information to you on that. But it's an interesting option for a funding source for us, and that long-term payback could help with our cash flow. And then Jason's going to start a rate study for us in the fourth quarter of 2025. So that's kind of what we talked about as the one plant, two plant teams, our consensus, and what we came up with as a path forward.
Well, I love the redundant trains, or whatever you call it, the ability within the same building or whatever to, hey, we got to fix this one or upgrade. We all step over. It's the same technology, whatever the most modern technology is that we could get for the plant, and even 3 rather than 2, I like redundancy on redundancy when we're talking critical systems. So I don't know that I have a question in here. I'm glad we have great experts, and we've got other folks helping us out too on figuring this out. What beyond that time frame that you described, when would things start coming to a town board? I didn't say this town board. Sure. Saying, okay, we've got a place, we've got a design, or we're ready to start a design, and
Sure,
where is that?
the first step would be completing that master plan, and then we bring the master plan to you all and have, a presentation about the master
So
plan.
it's not that far away.
Do public outreach, get some input from residents and citizens and so forth. So that's kind of a process in itself, just to make sure that we've vetted the master plan and we've got an opportunity to present it to this board and to get feedback from you on the master plan. And that'll include recommendations, not just on treatment, but that includes storage and distribution and so forth. So that, and it's been a while since we updated the master plan. It's 2015 was the last one.
As we prepare the 2026 budget, will we have to give consideration to some design costs?
Not yet. Like, we have an informal plan laid out, but first place gets you to approve the master plan, and then that master plan cost goes into the rate study. So we anticipate there will be an increase in water rates. We just don't know how much until we get a rate study done. We haven't raised rates in a while. And again, nothing gets cheaper as time goes by. It always gets more expensive. We also need to look at funding options and what we can do. Designing, locating, and building a new plant is going to be a years-long effort. It's not something we're going to do in a year or two. Just finding a site takes a lot of time and a lot of engagement with the public and with the board and so forth. So this is not a quick, let's build a plant tomorrow thing. It's going to be years of us coming to you all and your next board and the board after that probably.
Maybe we can have a new police department, water plant, and arts building.
All at
the
once,
same-
right?
Yeah, right. So,
Yeah, I was interested in that timeline too, and I'm thinking it's minimum of 10 years probably, right?
I think if you were super aggressive and everything lined up like a magic, it would be 5 years, and that's crazy. So I always say 8 to 10.
Yeah, okay. And the mayor mentioned this, but we've got a lot of different priorities to fund too. Police department is going to be expensive. This is going to be expensive. And we don't know what revenues in the future are going to be. We have, reasons to be concerned about them and reasons to be optimistic about it too. And so my experience with major projects is the financing is always the key to make it work. And I gather, just like with the police department, there aren't substantial grants available. There may be loans available that, then you work into the rate structure and
Right.
pay it off. But, to the extent we need to come up with general fund dollars for this is a challenge for sure.
Trustee Brown, this would be, since the water fund is an enterprise.
Oh, yeah.
We are actually limited in how much money we can contribute from the general fund to the water plant. So we would likely build the financing package, assuming no contribution
Well,
from the
and
general
that goes
fund.
back also a little bit to the issue of what the power department pays to the town from time to
So
time
the
too.
water transfer is substantially lower
Than
to the
the
effect
power,
of,
yeah.
I'm gonna ballpark it at around 200,000, and I
That's not
would
much, yeah.
anticipate in future budgets eliminating that as we move into funding water plants, because every little bit's gonna count.
Okay.
And I hear our finance director cringing in the back as I say that.
Crazy. Yeah, she's got to figure out how to do it. Right. Thank you.
We also have consultants that help us look for grants. There are grants around. I mean, we'll talk about Carriage Hills later and the grants we got with that. There are water treatment plants grants too. We just don't bank on them until we know what the terms are and how hard they are to get and actually getting them. Plus flexible funding options. That WIFIA thing I mentioned is an EPA program, so it's funded through EPA and it's got some attractiveness to it. It doesn't really give you a break on interest, but it gives you a break on repayment terms.
It's more of a curiosity question since we have the time. But when I was first elected, Mike gave me a tour of the Glacier Creek plant, which was so fascinating. Oh my gosh. The gravity flow piece of it is just wild. But I'm curious about are we kind of like on a wing and a prayer over there in terms of its functionality for, if we're talking 8 to 10 years? That's my first question. And then my second is, understanding that we've kind of reached we're toward the end of its life. What then happens with that property if we did indeed move into, this single treatment plant? How do we decommission that equipment there? Like, what's that process look like? And I understand, again, I'm just asking more out of curiosity because we have some time.
Yeah, that is something we will have to explore on decommissioning the plant and what that looks like and what happens to the property and how, it's in the middle of the YMCA campus and, all that is stuff that will have to be worked through. The first part of your question, can Glacier make another 5 to 8 or 10 years? Maybe there's some improvements we need to make to that plant just to keep it functional. But we also want to invest a little more attention into Mary's Lake because that's a little bit newer and that may be an easier way to keep that one as a kind of going at the same time. So both plants will need something to keep them operational. Okay. They are kind of duct tape and bale and wire holding them together, so.
Spit in a prayer, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess that's exactly where my question is. How much are we? It sounds like we are being attentive to just enough to make sure we still have functioning and reliable water, but we're not investing way too much that we can't recover later if we do decide to move to
we're
this
not going to
single
go
treatment.
remodel the whole thing or anything like that. We're just doing what we have to do to keep it functional. And we've got a really talented team with Jason Fredericks and his gang, and they're good at spotting things hopefully before they become bigger issues and doing what they can to keep them going. Yeah. I don't know if you want to add, Jason.
Yeah, I think Jackie's spot on there. We've identified things that we need to do without spending too much on like long-term infrastructure at Glacier. So just working with James and Mike Northcutt, James Rossi, Mike Northcutt, and myself, have worked through identifying projects that we can do, things to make improvements without, like I said, spending that huge amount of capital so that we're spending wisely, but also just making sure that the operators are terrific at identifying what we need to do to keep things running there. So using some ingenuity at times to do that. Now it's the perfect time to start planning and getting something implemented that we can do to make sure that we don't get into a position where we're in this oh no moment. So that's why we're going through this
Literally up the
process.
creek.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, yeah, having that master plan and getting through that and making sure that everybody is on the same page with how we're wanting to move forward, and then developing that plan and working it. And we'll be doing that as soon as we can. Of course, the challenges with financing that, I think, are going to be something we've got to work through. But in the end, we want to do what's best for the community, and part of this is what we're doing in the process is making sure we're identifying things correctly so that we can spend our capital wisely in the right places. So,
Thank you.
is that hopefully answer your question? But yeah, we're not quite to the point of baling wire and duct tape, but we don't want to get ourselves into the point where that is, and then we're like, oh, well, now we've got the oh no moment. So
When I toured both of the plants in my first couple months with Jason and, as I call him, Professor Mike Northcutt, because he's so smart and knew everything, I was both amazed and worried because of some of that antiquity we were getting into. I'm just curious, with one plant, in my very simple understanding, I think of Glacier Creek as chemical primarily. I think of the Mary's Lake one as those really cool, fibrous-y, filtery kind of things and everything. What would be the technology? Do we know what technology we'd be using? Or would we have parallel trains of different technology?
Yeah, I mean, it would be something we would work with an engineering consultant, so it would be to be determined based on their recommendations, working with staff to kind of get their input as well, so that it's not just the operators making these decisions, but it would be, like I said earlier, just the best available treatment technology based on our water quality, what we've got. So the source water, what happens to the water after we treat it in the distribution system can be a factor that you're looking at for treatment technologies, chemical addition, and things like that. Future regulations, what are the best treatment practices for removing or having that potential to remove things that we, are maybe not regulated now, but just moving on to what that might look like, having the ability to do that. So it could be, there's two approaches. The conventional treatment process is one, and then membrane is another. You can have one or the other. Membranes, you can have one or the other, or a combination of both in a treatment process. So you might have a conventional treatment process, which is pretty simple, and then at times you might utilize membrane treatment processes when water quality challenges create that need to have an additional higher technology process in place. So I'm not trying to be vague, but we're not trying to narrow it down into one area yet either. So, but those are some of the ideas that you could utilize so multi-factor approach might be something we utilize. So.
A lot of mysteries. What is I'm on pins and needles about the one plant versus two plant team. Do we have to wait until the third quarter, or what's the end of that? Who won?
I think that the consensus that we came to was that we need to have a water treatment plant that can meet our needs year-round.
Well, that was so satisfying. It was not satisfying in the
I
competition.
think I can translate.
And
Heavily involved in this process. We have a wonderful group of folks over at the water department.
Sounds like a
it's a
good
pleasure
process.
to work with them. So where we landed was indeed with keeping Mary's online, investing in Mary's, building a brand new plant, and then as Mary's reaches the end of its useful life, which it will even with increased investment, make a determination at that time, how comfortable do we feel operating in this single plant mode, and is the cost benefit of rebuilding Mary's or building a new second plant somewhere worth the benefits? So we've sort of hedged our bet. We took the middle road. We said we have a plant that still with some investment has useful life in it. We want to build one plant that has true redundancy, which is a very complicated picture when you look at how our water plants currently operate. because of when we can operate each plant. We want one plant that can operate year-round and serve the entire town's needs. And then later down the line, when Mary's reaches the end of its useful life, make a determination about whether we keep a full plant going for whatever the cost may be at that point.
Thank you for interpreting. How big is the water department? People-wise, how big is the crew?
Currently, we have 15 people on staff.
Seems like you do so much. Every time there's a problem, there must be 30 people working on it, and it just feels like there's so much going on that it's impressive. It's impressive to run the whole facility. So thanks for all the information.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you for that comment. So we got a good team of people that I think that just to add to that real quick, that, we've got some issues that we've been identifying, but I think that our best asset here is our staff that we've got, the operators that make that happen and the support staff and everything. So appreciate that.
Okay, anything else you need from us? All good, thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
We can touch base on future study session agenda items or future agenda items. Travis.
Mayor, just two for me. We would like to come back to talk to you all about childcare licensing regulations and license exempt providers on August 26th, and then check in on the climate action plan, which is on the strategic plan on August 26th as well.
All good. I have one item I'm bringing up to the trustees for potential discussion from a constituent. You may have read some of the notes in the public forum, and I did commit to this constituent who owns KOA that I would dutifully bring this forth and see whether there was a consensus to take this discussion forward. It relates to code enforcement of bear safety and securing of containers. And the fundamental picture, if you haven't had a chance to read that string in the public forum, was that there is a use of these dumpsters or whatever trash receptacles, and they do latch them and lock them after hours, but during hours, because of the wide variety of visitors they have at KOA, they actually keep them unlatched so that wherever they come from in the world, these visitors can open that and get the stuff, the garbage in, as opposed to latching them during the day and having a lot of people very unfamiliar with those processes and leaving bags of trash on top of the dumpster, not knowing how to deal with that. There's plenty of human traffic and allegedly monitoring of this throughout the day. They haven't had issues with the bears. And so what he is suggesting, the owner-manager of KOA, is that there be an amendment, and I will just read his statement so I don't misinterpret it. Commercial exceptions. Exceptions may be granted on an individual basis to commercial operations if they can show that their trash containers are well monitored during hours of operation, preventing the access of garbage waste to the area's wildlife. The same requirements of a locked container apply to these exempted businesses when their office store is closed for the day and monitoring cannot take place, meaning they'd lock them after those hours. This exemption may be revoked should the commercial operation fail to continue to be able to meet these specifications. The code enforcement violation that they were given was not because of the intrusion of a bear and access to the garbage, but instead someone just said these are supposed to be locked and they got the violation, and that led to this conversation. Does the board, would I have a consensus on taking this forward to additional discussion, and town administrator, I don't know whether that would be study session or a report and discussion item. I don't think we'd have to decide that here, but does the board have a consensus of taking that topic forward?
I have an interest in having the conversation about how we apply laws and how we administer laws. And I think that that's the bigger conversation for me about this issue. Not specifically, is your dumpster locked? Did you put the bar through? My experience with the town, whether that's an administrative or a law enforcement level, is that there is a broad range of discretion, and depending on the person, that may be feel good or it might not feel good. Depends on, you know, how tight the law is. So for me, this is a philosophical, do we as a town, what's the spirit of the law? Are we enforcing the spirit of the law? Are we following and sticking with the details just because that's the law? So that's of interest to me as at the level of the board, that conversation, but not necessarily bare dumpsters.
Yeah, I'm fine talking about it. I'd like to hear where the other campgrounds go, if we've heard from others. There are a lot of ways to do this and secure the trash. May take some money, build some trash enclosures with gates and things that you don't need a PhD to open them. It's not really that difficult. Yeah, I'm open to discussing it, but I'd really like to see what really is the problem. Is it that hard? Because I've seen people in some of the campgrounds, they put their trash on top of the dumpster when the dumpster is not locked. You know, it's just.
Yeah, I suggested education might be a good first step.
Yeah, and see how the other campgrounds are, you know, is it really a problem we need to solve, or is it something that they can solve themselves pretty easily? And is it an education thing?
I mean, in the outhouses in the park, we now have those cute little pictograph signs that tell you not to stand on the toilet or do it on the floor and all of that. So, you know, education might be a useful tool.
Yeah, I think I agree with Frank on that one. I'm fine with talking about it, but I'm not particularly interested in discussing making individual accommodations for businesses. I think that I'd be really concerned about a slippery slope on that. Well, we've come out to check your dumpster and you're supervising it. Okay, so you've gotten an exemption during your open hours, and then all of a sudden management changes, and now it seems like we might actually be lending toward creating a problem. So I'm happy to have that discussion as a study session agenda item, but especially if a constituent has requested it, but I'm not convinced that I'd be in support of what is being requested in terms of changes.
Yeah, I support having the discussion as well.
I don't mind discussing it, but I think this could open up a lot of things that we may not want to. You've got restaurants that have, you know, their containers and you know, okay, so a business, what now are we going to classify? What kind of business? I think education is going to have to, you know, lend a hand on the owner side, but I'll talk about it.
That's sufficient in terms, town administrator. I think there's 5 of us, because I'd be included in sure, let's discuss it, and then determine in that discussion whether to take it forward. Do you have sufficient information to bring it as a study session item?
Yes, Mayor, we'll bring some options. They will likely not look like what you read because of the concerns. We can talk about a broader spirit versus letter of the law, the limits of discretion, when that discretion can be applied, when it shouldn't be applied, the differences between community-wide and individual accommodations, but we can merge those topics and then bring forward
that was the other thing
some
I was
different
gonna
options.
ask for, rather than leaving that out on a limb or as a second independent topic. It would be great if we could have that discussion.
At least to start, and if we want to branch off and have other conversations after the fact, we can do that as well.
Because the broader issue is something we should talk about. Okay, good enough. That's all I have.
So I would I would, somebody contacted me today about, again, the post office employees parking and the difficulties they're having in the summer, especially with the increase in Amazon packages they're having to deal with. So I don't know how we want to structure it, but I would possibly think about revisiting the issue and maybe finding out like almost a, I don't want to say a post-mortem, but some kind of research after our decision that we made about parking spots for the post office, how that's affecting the post office. You know, just basically re-looking at that and seeing if there's any other maybe constructive or different ways of looking at it, different ways of working it, or something like that. Because I do think they're having some problems with the increased Amazon packaging and in the summers. So I don't know if we can do like at least a research to find out if they have any other ideas or if, you know, kind of what's going on there.
I thank you for bringing that up. I would certainly be supportive of having a couple of the representative contractors come and describe in full detail some of the challenges that they're encountering. I think it would be educational and useful for us. We passed the ordinance amendment a couple months ago, whenever it was. But yeah, I continue to fall back on the service that they're providing us is an amazing and daily service, and we have certainly created it to be much more complex, and I don't think we all even realize all the stuff that happens to make it difficult. Walking from the post office a mile and a half in the rain through elk, whatever. They can describe it better. I think there's many, many anecdotes and stories that would help educate us and perhaps hear some ideas for how to advise them to improve. And I do know that I sometimes feel a little bit of a loner on this. I know it's like, well, let the federal government solve that. Let the post office solve that. Well, let's help. Anyway.
Back to the wildlife one. Can we make sure the code enforcement officer comes to that? Because there may be other things in there that she's seen experience-wise, that some other tweaks, as long as we're looking at it, let's not just look at this part, let's look at the whole thing. There's some little things in there that I think might be able to be adjusted and just tweaked a little bit now that we've ran it for a while. And if the post office would move somewhere else where they had adequate facilities, they wouldn't have this problem.
And we continue to work that topic, and that's obviously a long-term one, but with Travis's help and with Joe Neguse, the Office of Joe Neguse, we're putting together documentation in that direction for space constraint, and some municipalities have had success in recent years with that. Maybe we will, even in this tough time. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's what I was going to say is if we are going to revisit the ordinance and how that's going, I think we also need to see what are they doing on their side. I would like to hear from them to, you know, okay, how are you guys addressing your problem? You know, are you guys doing anything? What plans do you have? So I would like to have all that information.
Yep. Yeah, are they hiring another contractor to shuttle them back and forth, for example? All that good. There's 50 different ideas floating there.
Yeah, I just want to be careful. We did just approve it a couple months earlier. You know, we knew some of this could be an issue. We talked about it as part of it. I don't know if we have enough data to really see if it's having, it might, you know, an impact on them. Certainly, I think it's valuable to hear that, but we, you know, some of the other goals we were hoping to achieve by making this change, I don't know if we'd have that data. So I would just personally want to be, if we do have this an agenda item, be cognizant of how much staff time we're requesting to spend on this, seeing, you know, I want to address problems where we can and find solutions and make that a better service for all. And I want to make sure we're not bogging staff down with an additional, you know, bringing this back with more work after we've they gave us some pretty extensive presentations on it to get us to this point. So that's all. I'm not saying we don't talk about it, but I just want to be sensitive to that.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that right now, since we did just make it a few months ago, and it is July, and they've had this increase at Amazon, I just think to looking at the whole impact of it, we always talk about going back and looking at the impact of our decisions. And this might be too soon. I'm not saying it's not, but I think it's a goal that we should all have, is to make that we make certain decisions, and we have to go back and look at how did that affect our community, or how did it affect whoever it affects. So I don't disagree, maybe a little early, but I think that maybe in the summer is probably a great time to looking at it, or, or whatever. So I just think it is our responsibility in most decisions to go back and look at the effects of what our decisions are. Timing of it is up to debate, obviously, so.
Yeah, okay, good enough. Any other topics? If not,
Mayor, I'm not 100% sure what to do with that one. I've heard bringing representatives from the post office in for conversation. I can tell you probably if this falls on Manager Klein's lap to research and bring something back, it likely won't happen until after the parking season, and that does not sound like it's lined up with what you're hoping to hear from sooner. So if there's context that you have, I know that sometimes USPS personnel are hesitant to talk in public forums because of regulations on the USPS side, but if you all have contacts, or I can reach out to the postmaster and see if they're willing to come talk.
I believe I have the contacts, and that there would be 2 or 3 who would be willing to speak in public and describe in detail some of the challenges they're encountering. And I don't think anything would have to fall on Manager Klein.
So we can add post office operational perspective, and then Mayor, if you'll send me those contacts, I can get them lined up
And I
for.
would say maybe first in August might be the
I'll look at
potential, but let me
and
know.
coordinate with them on schedule.
Okay. Okay, anything else?
I just have one quick to follow up on that. What was the date we passed that? When did that start?
2 months ago?
Sometime in May, I think.
It was right before the paid parking season started, so it would have been early May, I believe.
Yeah, 2 months.
To me, I think we should not look at this. I think looking at it 6 months, I would like to see after the holiday. To me, the holiday shopping and Amazon would be even more so impactful than now, but maybe, and do like a 6 month instead of a 3 month.
If there's a desire to delay, I'd suggest a delay to the end of the paid parking season, because after the paid parking season, the permit is unnecessary. They don't need the commercial loading permit because there's not the paid parking in effect.
It was April 22nd.
I mean, I would be I think it's good that we look back and see how it went, but I think it may be premature at 3 months. I mean, I think making decisions, okay, should we adjust something for next year?
Right.
I mean, I think we need to give this some time to, put a little pressure on them to figure out their stuff. It's not always, it shouldn't be our problem. And sometimes that takes a little bit of time.
I think this would be an education session for us, not a redesign of the ordinance. I'm not suggesting that in this season we consider retracting that ordinance. I'm just considering that we hear their situation.
I mean, I think we can still do that at 6 months. I mean, they're still, they don't have to do that, but they can still tell us how it was, right?
Well, I guess
After the permit
it
time
really
is over?
falls to
I
how
don't
many
know.
on the board would want to.
Well, I was the one that brought it up. I have no problem waiting even the whole season. My thing is, I think we have to revisit it. And we have to look back at it, because I think we do have to, I was of the same thought process that you were saying, exactly. But I do think that when we talk about, it's not really us versus them, and it kind of feels a little bit like us versus them. Maybe that's just how I'm feeling, that it's us versus them, so I'm not putting that in anybody else's thought process. But I don't think it should be that. I think it should be an our issue. And even though I may be feeling like it's escalated to them because, you know, I get what you're saying, but I do think it's an our issue and I think it's a town issue. So I'm not saying to change anything and I'm not saying we have to do it right now. I just think that we need to revisit decision and figure out, is there something more creative that they can do? Is there more creative that we can do? Just to working together to try to make it good for everybody. Because I don't think it's the individual workers over there that are having an issue whether they move the post office or not. You know what I mean? So that's not, you know, their issue. And it's not our town issue, although the big picture, it is the town issue. But this is not how we do it by saying, we're going to make it really difficult, so you have to move the post office. Not that, you know, when I go to my second grade attitude, I kind of feel that way, but I do think it's more of the whole issue that we should be looking at. That's all. But it doesn't have to be now. It's just timing is not the issue. It's that we have to go back and look at our decisions.
Yeah, I do think, I think there's probably some history there too of attracting more flies with honey versus vinegar kind of thing. When it comes to some of that working relationship with the post office and the town. But I would be way more supportive of us putting this as an approved unscheduled study session item that is for post parking season, maybe beginning of November, or whatever, whenever we can get that data really wrangled, because I think that would be helpful. And in the meantime, that doesn't mean that we can't hear perspectives from them. And, you know, it's probably most poignant when it's fresh and it's currently in season. And maybe that's a more accessible, maybe there's a more accessible way to do that than making it a study session agenda item. Maybe there's, you know, those can be kind of consolidated and emailed or included in a weekly report or something like that. I don't want to cut anybody off from sharing their story or perspective, but I think Cindy's point is good that we might want a whole season of data in before we start discussing potential solutions.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'd rather wait as well, I think. And this isn't a new problem. We just did the ordinance, but I remember when I was researching an article I did for the paper on the post office, I found an ad that they placed in 1982 where the post office was soliciting bids for parking off-site for their employees and their contractors. Same thing, and that was almost 43 years ago, yeah. So waiting another 5 months when this problem's been going on for 43 years. Whether we do an ordinance or not, we're going to hear the same thing.
Paid parking ends in mid-October, I think. So I don't think you're looking at 5 or 6 months out. You could conceivably talk about it in late October or beyond. And I know the holiday season was suggested, but I think the issues will still be fresh from the summer, and then you've got several months before the next summer begins. So I would suggest that we do it shortly after that paid parking season ends. Okay. Now, anything else? Seeing none, this session is adjourned. We'll be back at 7 p.m. sharp for the board meeting.
Hey, can I get a picture of you guys in your Western wear?
Where? Oh.